Before I begin, there will be spoilers for most, if not all, pieces of media in the Dragon Age series, including all three games and their various DLCs, the Masked Empire, and the comics. Also to note, unless a character is canonically a lesbian, as Sarah and Celine are, I will default to using woman who loves women or some other term, as many of the women in question are bisexual. Dragon Age is better than most games in terms of LGBT representation. In terms of just companions, 3 out of 10 of your companions aren't straight or aren't cis in DAO. In DA2, 4 out of 9 companions are bisexual, plus Talus, a temporary companion from Mark of the Assassin, is open to kissing a hawk of any gender. In DAI, 3 companions out of 9 and 2 advisors out of 3 aren't straight. But it's not perfect, especially when women are involved. Let's start in in-universe chronological order. Keep in mind I'm not touching on relationships between love interests and the player character in this, only LGBT women NPCs. Though I will touch on the number of romances open to a player playing as a woman who loves women versus the number of romances open to a player playing as a woman who loves men. As far as I know, there aren't any canonically LGBT women in The Last Flight, and I'm fairly certain I don't remember any in either The Stolen Throne or The Calling. Liliana's Song is an interesting standalone prequel DLC for DAO, and it's honestly one of my favorite games, despite having a runtime of roughly half an hour. It's got beautiful music and somehow manages to have visuals I find stunning, despite being made in DAO's engine. The best part? It revolves around the relationship between 2 women and contains a stunning 3 out of 6 primary characters who are women who love women. What's not to love? But Liliana's song centers around Liliana's relationship with Majolaine, and Majolaine is abusive. Not only does she attempt to manipulate and control Liliana, but at one point she stabs Liliana. Now I think the game is amazing, and if it existed in a vacuum, it would be perfect. But this game chronologically features the first relationship between 2 women in the Dragon Age series, and it features something that will come up again and again in regards to relationships between women in the Dragon Age series: abuse. In the main game, Liliana, who is the only woman companion romanceable by a woman NPC, is very difficult to find, especially if you don't play many video games. I personally missed her on my first playthrough. There's another abusive relationship, that of Branka and Hespeth. Branka is so desperate for Caridan's anvil that she's willing to turn the woman she loves, Hespeth, into a broodmother to do it. Hespeth kills herself to keep from turning, and you must either side with Branka and begin turning casteless people into golems, kill Branka, or convince her to destroy the anvil and kill herself. There's another thing women who love women in the Dragon Age series tend to have in common. They die a lot. Liliana can be killed at the Temple of Sacred Ashes, though she comes back in the next 2 games. Apparently in DAI you find out she was a lyrium spirit. I've never completed a playthrough where Liliana dies, so I don't know about that. You can convince Liliana to kill Majolaine to harden her. Branka and Hespeth both die. Iona, who can be flirted with and slept with by a Kuzland of any gender, is violently killed off during the Kuzland origin. Again, many of these deaths make sense within the narrative, and if they existed in a vacuum, they'd be fine. But this is a trend. Iona is also the only woman character one can have a mini-romance with if one is a woman, whereas a woman who romances men has Tamlin and Gorham, and can also express an interest in Jowan and I believe Cullen. A female city elf is also automatically given a fiancé who's a man rather than a woman, which makes sense from a lore perspective, but again, it's another mini-romance a character can't play as a woman who loves women. Transgender women in DAO are also mistreated. In the Pearl, in Denerim, there are sex workers labeled as female companions with female in quotes, as opposed to other women sex workers without the quotes. This is transmisogynistic, as these women are clearly intended to be transgender, and the flavor text somehow implies they're not real women because they're transgender. Also at the Pearl, While I personally don't mind it and think it's in character for him, Ogren will approve if you're a woman warden who hires a sex worker who is also a woman, which many people might find, if not homophobic, then uncomfortable. He also faints at the idea of the PC, Liliana, and Isabella having a threesome. I'll also add the only way you can get that threesome to happen is if you kill Marjolaine, which hardens Liliana. This is uncomfortable for a lot of reasons because something the player wants to have happen can only happen with the death of a woman who loves women, and it also implies that polyamory is somehow a bad thing, which makes no sense from an in-universe lore perspective, as Andraste had 2 husbands and probably an elven lover on the side. She probably doesn't care that Liliana is having sex with her girlfriend and a hot pirate. Also in DAO, there was intended to be a scene where a woman warden and Morrigan did the dark ritual together, but that was apparently too weird, and it was decided to have a woman warden convince either Alistair or Logan to have sex with Morrigan despite neither wanting to, and Alistair in fact hating her, was better. In DA2, things are a little better. There are 2 full romances with companions for someone who wants to play as a Lady Hawk and romance women, as opposed to 3 choices for a Lady Hawk who wants to romance men. That's 2 in the base game and 1 in the DLC. But there are still problems. Isabella is, like Liliana, very easy to miss if one doesn't think to go back to the Hangman after recruiting Anders. She can also leave midway through the game if one is not a close enough friend or rival with her, and she can be returned to the Canary, who will likely torture her. Also, Meryl, another woman companion interested in Lady Hawk, can be killed if one sides with the Templars and doesn't have a high enough friendship or rivalry with her. But by far the biggest problem in DA2 is Serendipity, a sex worker who works at the Blooming Rose. While BioWare claims Serendipity is intended to be a drag queen, this is not clear in the game at all, and she seems to many, including one trans woman I spoke with, to be a really offensive representation of a trans woman. The woman even told me she was unable to finish the game for days after meeting Serendipity, and that only finding out she wasn't intended to be a trans woman, but in fact a drag queen, was she able to play again. Next chronologically is the comics. To clarify, I mean the Alistair Hunts for Mara comics, The Silent Grove, Those Who Speak, and Until We Sleep. I think Mage Killer is set during DAI, though I'm not sure as I've not read it, so it's touched on further in. Mavaris is featured in the comics. She's a trans woman magister from Devinter, and Varric's cousin's widow. She's an amazing, dynamic, and interesting character, but she's revealed to be trans by having her top ripped open while being tortured. I have to wonder if BioWare would put a cis woman through the same treatment. The Masked Empire and Asunder are both next. The extent of LGBT women in Asunder is the appearance briefly of Liliana, though I also personally headcanon Adrian as having a crush on Grand Enchanter Fiona. Oh, Adrian, you are truly the only person anywhere to understand my pain. But Masked Empire is centered around the romance between 2 women. Again, like Liliana's song, it's abusive. Celine commits an act of genocide against Brialla's people, the elves, and manipulates and verbally abuses her. Her abuse is textbook. But we're not told any of this, including the fact that she commits genocide in DAI, even though both are things Liliana would almost certainly know. We can even get her and Brialla back together. And while I'm glad 2 women end up together is shown as a good ending, an abuse survivor should never be put back with her abuser. Celine can also be killed in DAI. This is another thing which makes sense in context, and in a vacuum is a very good thing for the reasons I mentioned above, but this makes yet another LGBT woman killed. This is a trend. In DAI, if one plays as an elven woman interested in men, the origin with the most choices, one has 4 romance options. If you play as an elven woman interested in women, you only have half that and a mini romance thing with Scout Harding. Josephine's romance, despite being in the works for longer than Cullen's, has very little content to it. And Sarah the first lesbian companion in any of the games, can be dismissed at any time for any reason. She's the only character you can do that. It's also worth noting that BioWare chose to make another man romanceable by women rather than expanding the mini romance between the Inquisitor and Scout Harding, which would have added another full romance for women who love women. There are relationships between NPCs where two parties are women in DAI. One is between Ritz and Eldrita. Ritz is a scout for the Inquisition. They're not in an abusive relationship, which is impressive, but Eldrita is killed by Templars during the game and you cannot save her. Ritz can also be killed, but you can save her. A second is between Dagna and Sarah. It's a really cute, happy, not abusive romance. But on the downside, you need to have a DLC to see it. Much the same way in terms of race, the only way for you to have a character in DAO who had a non-white family member was buying a DLC, and having DLC be necessary to get representation is silly. As for representation of trans women, Mavaris appears again, this time in War Table missions. There's not much to note regarding that, but I like that she shows up. But then there's a codex entry which makes things bad. The codex entry, titled A Nutty Affair, which appears in Theron Falls Out if one sides with the Templars, or can be purchased in Val Royeaux if one sides with the mages or misses it during the quest, is terrible. Like textbook transmisogyny. It's about how, after a divine died, a rumor began circulating that she was man, because someone swore she had a penis, which, okay, no. A woman with a penis is still a woman. Apparently a squirrel had crawled into her casket and up her skirt. Like, I get this codex entry is supposed to be funny, but it's not for a number of reasons. One, it equates genitals with gender. The divine in Southern Thedas is a woman. If the divine is a woman, which everything indicates she was before she died, why should her genitals matter? Two, it adds nothing lore-wise. The codex entry literally tells us one thing. It tells us nothing except that there was a divine named Clemens II. We know nothing about her, nothing about what she did. It tells us nothing of interest except, haha, women don't have penises. Third, it could have been a chance to give us a great codex entry about a divine who was a trans woman. Just a rough codex entry off the top of my head. Divine Theodora I was born in a mountain village north of Carthel's Crossing in Ferelden. Her family thought when she was born that she was a boy and tried to raise her as such, but they quickly realized they in fact had a daughter. Other than that, little is known about her early life. Like many, Theodora was pledged to the chantry at a young age. She became a sister at 10 and a mother at 17. She was well liked and rose through the ranks rather quickly. After the death of Divine Ramilda I, Theodora was chosen as the next divine. Today, she is usually remembered for one thing: the exalted march on Starkhaven, which she called down after King Frizz's throne was stolen by his Tevinter allies. The conflict was short, but still cost the lives of many hundreds of men and women. Like, it's not a perfect codex entry, but it's much better than the one above. BioWare could have done better. I know they could have done better, and they didn't do better. Finally, there's Mage Killer. I don't read Mage Killer. I don't like Mage Killer. Mage Killer apparently has two women who end up together. It's not abusive, and neither one of them die. So I might have to read Mage Killer. In summary, of the 5 relationships between 2 women in the Dragon Age series, 3 are abusive, 4 have at least one member of the relationship who can die, and only 1 ends happily, provided you don't dismiss the woman involved in the relationship. Out of 17 or so women who are LGBT, 8 can die. That's almost half. 3 of those die no matter what you choose. And transgender women have it worst of all, with only one character who so far has primarily been in the comics to represent them, and nothing but cruel transmisogynistic jokes otherwise. So BioWare, you're doing better than most companies out there. But don't rest on your laurels. You can do even better. Please try for your fan. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day, guys. Like if you like this video, subscribe if you want to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'm so glad you guys are here watching my video. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.